Jonathan was the prince of Israel, son of King Saul. The story of Jonathan in the Bible became known mainly because of his friendship with David. The biblical text records that Jonathan was very loyal to David, although David was persecuted by Saul, the father of Jonathan. And in this video, you will understand what the Bible says about who was Jonathan. The name Jonathan means Yahweh tempted. Even this name is quite common among the biblical characters of the Old Testament, occurring at least 15 times. Jonathan was the heir prince of the throne of Israel. Apparently, her mother was called Anuan, and her brothers were Abinadab, Malchishua, Sketch, Merab, and Michal. The latter was David's wife. In addition to these, Jonathan also had at least two other brothers, Harmony and Mephibosheth, children of a concubine of his father. Jonathan had a son, also called Mephibosheth, who was only 5 when he died. Mephibosheth was crippled and was created in the city of Lodebar. Until David honored the pact made with Jonathan, he attributed Saul's inheritance, as well as a place in the court of Israel. Jonathan was a great warrior. After Saul's decisive victory over the Ammonites, Israel's army was separated into 2 divisions, being one of them about Jonathan's leadership. In this context, he appears in the biblical narrative being quoted as victorious in Geba, an advanced post of the Israelites, after killing the local Philistine leader. The biblical record of Samuel's first book, especially in chapter 14, makes clear the courage and skill of Jonathan in war very clearly. When accompanied only from his squire, he was able to defeat an entire garrison of Philistines. And later Jonathan was almost killed by his own father after breaking, unknowingly, a fasting vow that Saul had imposed on the people. However, the Israelites did not allow Jonathan to suffer any damage in the hands of Saul. And that was also proof that Israel's great disturbing was Saul and not Jonathan. Finally, and the history of Jonathan told in the biblical texts makes it clear that he was an exemplary person. He had a firm personality that was reflected in his sensible decisions and courageous actions. His behavior inspired Israel's soldiers, so he was also a great advisor in war techniques. His analytical ability to make strategic decision-making, based on his intact conduct, often conflicted with his father's foolishness, and this worldwide. And sometimes Jonathan tried to mediate an approximation between Saul and David. And even in the midst of that tense environment, Jonathan was faithful to David, and at the same time honored his father, accompanying him even at the time of his death. And an important part of Jonathan's story was his friendship with David. Jonathan and David had a strong friendship, it is true, so that Jonathan loved him like himself. The Bible says that they made a fraternal pact after David defeated the giant Goliath, and Jonathan gave him as a gift his own cape of prince and his armor, as we read in Samuel's first book in chapter 18. And when the conflict between David and Saul reached more serious proportions, Jonathan acted as a peacemaker, even with his own father pressuring him to betray his best friend. And it was Jonathan who warned David that Saul's wrath against him would not be placated. But it is remarkable that Jonathan recognized that David was God's chosen man to reign in Israel. And although David had not been sworn in, and even Jonathan being the natural heir of the throne in the position of prince, he showed fidelity to David, revealing that the friendship between them was disinterested. About this, the biblical text says, "Then got up Jonathan, son of Saul, and went to David in the woods, and comforted his hand in God. And he said unto him, No themes. He won't find you the hand of Saul, father, but you will reign over Israel, and I will be with you the second, which also Saul, my father, well knows." And both made the covenant before the Lord. David stayed in the woods, and Jonathan returned to his house. Then, after Jonathan strengthened David in his confidence in the Lord, they both renewed the covenant they had made. The 2 friends promised to protect each other's offspring and agreed that when David went up to the throne of Israel, Jonathan would be his assistant. But Jonathan did not survive so that he could become David's assistant in Israel. In fact, he died with his father and brothers in the tragic defeat of the Israelites against the Philistines. At this point, the biblical text reports the Philistines, because they fought against Israel. And the men of Israel fled from the Philistines, and fell dead in the mountain of Gilboa. And the Philistines persecuted to Saul and his children, and killed Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, sons of Saul. And after the death of King Saul and his sons, his bodies were exposed by the Philistines on the Beth Sea wall, until they were taken by the residents of Jabes of Led, who buried them under a grove in Jabes. And when he learned of the deaths of Jonathan and Saul, David deeply regretted, as we can read in the first chapter of Samuel's second book in the Old Testament. However, later, the Bible says that David honored his friend's promise and received with honors the son of Jonathan, Mephibosheth.
You reached the end, and that's more than just watching a video. It's an act of attention in a time where almost no one listens to the end. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you want, share this with someone who values this as much as you do. Thanks, a big hug, and see you next time.